What are the biggest contributors, from your lens have really crept in that are dysfunctioning us?
I think, first of all, we know that 40 to 70% of our immune system is patterned, meaning how it behaves, is tied to what we eat or what we've been exposed to as we eat. And so that's a pretty big one. Number two is the environment in which we live as it relates to our viruses and bacteria and things that we've gotten as infectious illnesses over the course of our life. They also influence our immune system. And we know that, like long COVID, people are experiencing now as a consequence of infection with SARS-CoV-2, is a resonant effect.
I have to pause this episode to share something that's completely transformed how I feel every single day, and it all starts in my gut. I'm talking about Pendulum's Metabolic Daily, and I'm genuinely obsessed. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, and so much of that comes down to our gut microbiome. If you're constantly battling afternoon energy crashes, sugar cravings, and that sluggish feeling after meals, Metabolic Daily can change everything. This isn't your typical probiotic. It contains live Akkermansia muciniphila. It's an incredible next-generation strain that most of us are deficient in. It literally strengthens your gut lining and helps your body metabolize sugars and carbs so much more efficiently. What I love most is how it makes me feel. My energy is sustained throughout the day. I'm not constantly thinking about my next snack, and I actually feel a little bit more full faster. It's like my body finally learned how to work with the food instead of against it. Plus, my digestion has never been better. What sets Pendulum apart is the science. They were founded by PhD scientists and doctors with the Mayo Clinic as their first investor. They're the first company in the US to bring live Akkermansia to market using DNA sequencing in an oxygen-free facility. I'm so selective about supplements that I recommend, and Metabolic Daily has earned a permanent spot in my routine and recommendation to my clients. Go to pendulumlife.com and use code MONA, M-O-N-A, for 20% off all Pendulum membership first orders. That's pendulumlife.com with code MONA. Your gut and your energy levels will thank you. Hello, Dr. Jeffrey Bland. Thank you so much for joining me on Rooted in Wellness today. I was just saying what an honor it is to sit here with you today. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mona. It's such an honor to sit with you. And I just had the extraordinary gift where you shared some of your personal experience with me, your journey. And it is a remarkable journey that I think so many people are seeking for the same type of outcome that you've achieved through your pursuit. And I think this is an important time for us to look within ourselves and then look outside and ask, how can we be the best that we can be in this very complex world in which we live? And how do we navigate through all the alternatives that our daily lives bring us and find a path that meets us, body, mind, and soul, in a way that makes our life of a century or more well worth being here?
Oh, I love that. That in and of itself just feels like wisdom. And for our listeners, I know everyone knows you, but you are the father of functional medicine. And you've brought so many issues to the table. And something that's really been an inspiration to me is the fact that you study systems biology. And I remember when my mom actually found you, and we dove deep into your work around immune system, how immune system, her autoimmune disease really just tied into that. Um, but the idea of systems and how that relates to ancient healing practices and Eastern medicine, who have always looked at the body in complete systems that function together. It wasn't in parts. And I'm so curious with your story, like what was the instigation to move in that direction? Where did you see the downfall or the things that were falling apart in your journey?
Well, I'm going to make a very kind of complicated, circuitous journey that, like all of our lives are. They're not linear paths. They have topographies. We go over mountains and into valleys. Hopefully, we don't spend too much time in Death Valley, and we move through all sorts of different domains. So certainly, my life is like that. And I have to say, having had now 79 birthdays, I've had a fair share of extraordinary opportunities over those nearly coming up 8 decades. But I think there is a kind of a central theme, if I could put it together, that really relates a lot to what each of us go through. and that is that we start to learn a little bit about ourselves. And as we learn about ourselves, we learn that there's certain things that light us up and make us the best we can be, and there are other things that bring us down and make life much more complicated. And so when I started to examine my trajectory, and I was in a traditional kind of situation of my education of science geek and going on into a medical school type education, um, I recognized there were lots of things that really intellectually turned me on, and fired me up and made me want to learn. But there are a lot of things about that system as I learned more about it that I felt were constraining and didn't really address some of the questions as to why we get sick. We had this dominant view of infectious disease, and we could say, oh, this bug created that disease, pneumonia created tuberculosis, or whatever it might be. But if we really ask about the dominant conditions, heart disease, dementia, arthritis, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, digestive disorders, depression, we really didn't have a good explanation where those things came from. They just happened. And then we found certain molecules that pharmacology was able to develop to block the symptoms of those conditions, but it really didn't cure these conditions. They continued to be present, and we were all willing to live with that because that was the state of affairs of the best we could do. But then as I started to examine, well, is that really the best we can do? And say, what else goes on in the world? I mean, not everybody studies from the same model. And what I started to recognize, if we went back to traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or traditional Amazonian medicine, or every culture had its own belief system. And therefore, what I started to recognize is that American medicine, as we were trained in practice, was a metaphor. There was nothing that was passed down on the altar saying this is medicine. It was the way that we interpreted through certain lenses and certain perspectives how we would translate people that are not well into how we were going to manage them. And we later landed on the term disease, thinking that once we could define the disease, we would know it. And what's happened is, or what did happen over many, many decades is, yeah, we started to define these diseases in certain kinds of uh, symptom profiles, but we didn't really know where they came from. And so it was like, okay, we classified them like you would classify plants and animals in an environment, but we didn't really know why they were there, what they did. So started to get very interested in that and ask, are these other healing systems that the world has seen grow up, are they similar in the way that they've codified things to that of Western medicine? And I came to the conclusion that in some respects they were similar, but in other respects they were very different. They were really tied much more tightly to an understanding of the relationship that person had to the environment in which they were living, to nature, to food, to interactions, to relationships, to weather, to energy. Where our system was really much more mechanical and focused on what's called pathophysiology, what the cells look like when they break down, what tissues look like when they're diseased. And so I started to say maybe there was some kind of a meeting in the middle between these two different worldviews as to what is ill health and where it comes from. And maybe to my fortune, I was born at a time. I'm a 1946 birthday, so I was born at a time where, over my adult life, the body of science started to understand much more mechanistically how things were actually starting to become less healthy and at the cellular level. And we found that a lot of these things were related to things like exposure to toxins, or exposure to toxic thoughts, or to hostile relationships, or to bad diets, what we call ultra-processed, what had been really described phenomenologically in the Eastern model as how people got sick. And so I thought, oh my word, then there is some kind of a system that we could conceive of, a system that tied these all together. So that was really the urgence of the functional medicine model in 1990, was my attempt to find a way of integrating the Western concept of pathology with the other healing systems around the world to find a unified kind of theory as to how they all tied together. Because I felt if we did that, then we might actually find a unified approach to their management. We might actually be able to consider it the treatment rather than just the remediation of symptoms. So that's a long-winded story. I apologize. Probably went more
No,
than you wanted.
you're such a great storyteller, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. You painted a really beautiful picture. And I can't even imagine back then, you as a prominent doctor with your medical background, just speaking about the interconnectedness of everything. And it's funny, we talk about integrative healthcare, and I still don't believe that we're there. I think there's still such a great disconnect. And I think that this is changing because people are understanding the kind of delusions, speaking to the book behind you. There's a lot of kind of delusions, and people are kind of sick and tired of living this way, especially with the rise of chronic disease. So, for our listeners, there's a book behind Dr. Bland called The Disease Delusions. And this is one of the most powerful books that I've ever read because it really reframes how we think about chronic illness. Um, and it moves away everything that you just talked about shifting from symptoms to looking at the source of everything. And what a phenomenal idea for everyone who's been diagnosed with someone, or all of us are touched by somebody who has a disease. What if they weren't given a label, right? What if they weren't given that pathology, this one label that instantly caused them to shut down and believe that they were sick, as opposed to maybe removing the label and just understanding that there was something that had to be uncovered in order to understand where that imbalance was coming from.
I'm so empowered by what you just said. That was a brilliant drop the mic summary.
Yep.
And I think you talked about autoimmune disease earlier, and that I think autoimmune is really a classic example of what you're speaking to, because we are led to believe, if you think of the traditional view of autoimmune disease, that somehow at some age the immune system of a person makes a decision that the immune system is living in a body that's a foreigner, and therefore they're going to attack that body, and the body becomes their enemy, not their friend. Our system that was supposedly our friend, and now suddenly it's our enemy that's starting to attack a gland. It could be a tissue. It could be the thyroid gland for thyroiditis, or it could be the adrenal gland, or it could be the heart, or it could be the brain, or it could be the pancreas, or there could be the joints, and that concept that suddenly our body woke up to think of us as not a friend anymore is a powerful kind of metaphor as to why would my body do that. In fact, the diagnosis for autoimmune diseases is often done on a blood test to look at the body's immune system producing reactive substances against your book of life, your DNA.
Yeah.
So we have this so-called anti-nuclear DNA. Why would the body so not like itself that it attacks actually the most fundamentally important part of our legacy, which is our genetic code of life? And I didn't actually ever believe that model was really very correct. I thought it was a kind of an explanation because we did find these things in the blood and we can analyze them. But the origin of them didn't seem right, that suddenly the body woke up to start to be not friend with itself. And so what we start to do, I think, as you said very nicely earlier, is that if you get that diagnosis, let's say it's systemic lupus erythematosus, or rheumatoid arthritis, or myasthenia gravis, or cystic fibrosis, or thyroiditis, there are 88 different definitions of autoimmune disease. That the doc who is in charge of helping you understand that disease will give an impression that they can name it now with a certain name. And that means they understand it. And suddenly that part of your body is no longer a friend. Now it's an enemy. And so it then begs the question, why? And are we just like suddenly unworthy to live in our body, and we're hostile in ourselves? And the answer now is emerging, I believe, very clearly to be no, it's much more than that. The body is not just suddenly awaking to not like itself. What's happening is you're having mimicking effects that are occurring in the body that create yourself, into your non-self.
Mm.
And when your non-self starts to appear, your immune system actually does what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to seek out foreigners and get rid of them. So when your self becomes non-self, oh my word, the immune system wakes up. Now you might say, well, hold it. If what you're saying is really correct, then why is it that something like 80% of the people who get autoimmune disease are females? It's
Yeah.
8 out of 10 cases are women across these 80 plus different types of diagnoses. Well, I go to the question of who has the most sophisticated immune systems, and it is women, because women are the gender, the sex that is going to have to learn how their immune system deliver the foreigner in their body,
Yeah.
and that foreigner might even be a different sex. I mean, you want to talk about an alien. So the immune system has to be so skilled that it's able to nurture and support a foreigner living for 9 months, presumably, um, while still maintaining function for the rest of the woman's body if she gets a cold and flu, so she still has an immune system. So that requires a lot of sophistication. So I think the female immune system, no, I don't think, I know that the female immune system is much more sophisticated in terms of its sensitivity, and therefore they may be more the low canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Their immune systems may be the first that start to demonstrate the change consequence of stuff that happens in the way we live. So let's take an example. Let's take an example of eating a high sugar diet. What does a high sugar diet do? Well, one of the things it does is it exposes your body cells to a lot of sugar, glucose. And glucose is, if it's not being able to be used rapidly because it's an overload, it has to find a place to hang out in the body. So one of the places it can hang out is it can chemically react with proteins of your body. One of those proteins that people are familiar with is a major protein floating around in your red blood cells called hemoglobin, makes your blood red. And if a sugar molecule reacts chemically with your hemoglobin, it produces what's called glycohemoglobin. That's hemoglobin A1C. And what do we use hemoglobin A1C for now? To test whether you're diabetic. Why? Because it means you have too much sugar and it starts attaching itself places that it shouldn't be, one of which is your hemoglobin. But that's only one of other many places in your body sugar is attaching itself. So if sugar is attaching itself in those cases, and it's not the same as what your body originally made, it's a new form of hemoglobin, or it's a new form of albumin, it's a new form of whatever protein, because it's now been connected to sugar, then what's your immune system do? It says, oh, this is a foreigner. I'm going to react. And some autoimmune disease and diabetes, you have a higher level of diabetes, of autoimmune diabetes, because your immune system is trying to fight back against these new foreign molecules called glycoproteins that are being formed by the consequence of too much sugar in your diet. What about a person that is exposed to a lot of polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, toxic pollutants? Those toxic pollutants react again with our body. And what do? They form a new kind of molecule, one that was different because it now chemically transformed due to the exposure of this foreign molecule. And what does our immune system do then? It starts to react as it should to defend ourselves from foreigners. And what's one of the glands in our body that tends to concentrate these foreign molecules? The thyroid gland.
Yeah.
So why do we see so much immune thyroiditis in women now? It's because, in fact, we are being exposed to things that are making our body different that get concentrated in the thyroid. So this story goes on and
It
on. Once you
does.
start looking at it from this perspective, it changes the way we approach it, saying it's not that you have a damaged immune system or a defective immune system or you're not worthy of immune help. It's that your immune system is highly sensitive and it's just being exposed to things for which it is reacting because your body gets transformed from self to non-self. So we want to get rid of non-self because you're really good. We want to get rid of those things that are not so good, and then we want to build back up your integrity. And in so doing, your immune system becomes friendly.
Yeah. We're going to get into all the assaults as we dive into this really, really big topic. But I love that reframe, moving from self to non self. And this is a complete paradigm shift also because we're still taught that when we get, I mean, any listener, if you've ever suffered from, an imbalance in your body, we tend to get angry with our bodies first, or why is this happening to me? Or, the campaign around F cancer. And autoimmune disease, when I was in nutrition school, we learned that it was attacking itself, but in the lens of now your body's actually doing everything that it can do because it loves you so much to protect yourself. And this is your opportunity to tune in, and how you can fix that is so refreshing and a completely different energy that it brings to your body, and really healing altogether. So you bring up all these diseases. I would say we're going through this immune system crisis today, right? And when you're speaking to these systems, and how it really connects to disease today, why would you say that there is such a rise in autoimmune disease and chronic inflammatory diseases also? And here's the thing, it's in people that even look healthy from the outside.
Yeah, I think that again, we're talking about a whole different model, aren't we? We're talking about a model of health that is less focused on how your body presents itself in damage and more on how your body presents itself in health. And we call this our healthcare system, but really is a very disease-centric system. It's really focused on the latter stage of this continuum between optimal health and when we leave the planet. So it's that last stage where we have our system. We call it healthcare, but it's really disease care.
Yeah.
What we need to start doing, and you do it very beautifully in your work, is start building the front edge of this, which is the healthcare system, which is focused on wellness, because the body has inherent incredible properties for restoration if we give it the right tools to do so. And if we give it the right tools, then that latter stage, that disease care stage, is very compressed, maybe even non-existent. And so I think that the construct now is, if we look at traditional healing systems, I look, for instance, at blue zones around the world where people commonly live to be 100 years of age or older, and they don't have often access to modern medicine. They don't have hospitals on every corner. They don't have a pharmacy in every block. But yet these people live out to 100 years of age with high level functioning, and they're still working and still integrated within society. So how does that happen? Well, it happens because their whole model of their lives is different as it relates to how they eat, how they think, how they act, their physical activities, their social interactions, their sense of self. And so I'm not arguing here for the myth, like we go back to the cave and we give over
Yeah.
modern living. But I'm just saying that there are so many ways that we on the front end should be considering how we actually treat our bodies to prevent the back end, which is the disease phase of the life, which generally starts, for most people around 50 years of age now, or earlier, which is horrible to think that you're going to spend a half of your life in a state of decrement on a slippery slope because you were constantly feeding the wrong things and thinking the wrong thoughts. And it doesn't have to be. These are reducible opportunities for us to do something.
Yeah, things really went wrong, right? Like when you think about all of the advances that we've had in medicine, in hygiene, in our systems, in our environment, there's really something that has shifted. And I would say that a lot of it does go back to our external environment and all the assaults that we've had. I remember reading, you would often write about the tsunami of immune dysfunction. And maybe I'll ask you this. What are the biggest contributors that from your lens have really crept in that are dysfunctioning us?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. That's I wish I or anyone had a complete understanding and answer to that question. So I'll give you my best um, approximation. So I think first of all, we know that 40 to 70% of our immune system is patterned as our immune system is being shaped. And most people don't recognize it. 40 to 70% of our immune system's architecture, meaning how it behaves, is tied to what we eat or what we've been exposed to as we eat. And so that's a pretty big one. Number two is the environment in which we live as it relates to uh, our viruses and bacteria and things that we've gotten as infectious illnesses over the course of our life. They also influence our immune system. And we know that, like long COVID, uh, that people are experiencing now as a consequence of infection with SARS-CoV-2 is a resonant effect, a holdover of what happened from that viral infection on the patterns of their immune system. So now the question that people would ask, is that irreversible? Or can there be ways of actually rejuvenating our immune system so that we get rid of those bad memories out of our immune system? And my answer is yes, there are now biological discoveries made in the last 20 years that indicate that our immune system can be rejuvenated. And so these marks that we put on from bad experiences, like viruses, can be changed out for new, more juvenile cells that don't carry those bad memories. In fact, most people, they don't realize that our immune cells in our body are replaced, turn over about every 120 days.
Right.
Meaning every 3 to 4 months, the immune cells that are in our body 4 months from now are going to be different than the immune cells we have in our body today. In fact, most people don't know that we make about 1 million new immune cells on average per second.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, per second.
Yes. So the question is, are those immune cells we're making, are they getting a full opportunity to be rejuvenated? And the answer in America today is no. Because what is the theme of the American immune system? They get worse as we get older.
You
It's
got it.
called immunosenescence, aging of the immune system. And would you be surprised if I told you that the biological age of your immune system is something with your age? And so you want to have a younger, more resilient immune system as a theme, not just for the protection against infectious disease, but for the whole nature of the protection of your health and wellness throughout the course of the decade, the century or more that you'll live. So when I start thinking about, well, what are the things that rejuvenate immune systems? It takes me back once again to looking at cultures that had been around for a long time that without a lot of modern medicine live long, healthy lives. And that's what landed me on this discovery, which was an aha for me about 6 years ago now, of this ancient food, this 3,500-year-old food called Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. Now, I knew about buckwheat, uh, but I had never, shame on me, heard about this Tartary buckwheat. It's named after the Tartan district on the Himalayas in China. And it turns out to be one of the 2 or 3 oldest foods that have been husbanded for human consumption. It's 3,500 years old. And it turns out it has this portfolio of nutrients called phytochemicals that is truly remarkable, about over 120 of them that the plant makes, that have very, very powerful immune strengthening activity. Now, why would a plant go to the difficulty of making 120 different things that have immune strengthening activity? Turns out that plants have immune systems. Yes, and their immune systems are somewhat similar to ours, except they don't have white blood cells floating around in the blood system. What they have is sap that carries immune active substances to the whole plant. And those immune active substances are things that the plant makes that are called these phytochemicals, polyphenols and flavonoids. And those are the things that often give color to foods, like the fruits and vegetables. And so these cultures that are associated with long life and health all have that similar principle. They use diets that are very high in these immune active ingredients from foods that are rich in their composition. It turns out that Tartary buckwheat, Himalayan variety being the highest, is extraordinarily rich in these immune active nutrients. So we then said, okay, well, let's study this in humans in the Western world. Let's take Himalayan Tartary buckwheat and let's then feed it under controlled conditions to a group of subjects in a study, IRB, FDA approved study, and see what effect it has on their immune system. It really affects the age of their immune system and the so we did that for 90 days. We used a very specific measuring tool called a gene chip that had over 700,000 gene sites on it that we can actually analyze the effect that the food had on their immune genetic profile. And lo and behold, we found at the course of the end of 30 days that the immune age of the group that took the tartary buckwheat polyphenols food was aging at 47% slower than the people that didn't take it. Almost 50% slower.
Almost 50%.
And so
slower.
we then started to analyze, well, what does that mean as it relates to immune health? And then it starts to show lower levels of inflammation, lower levels of hyperactivity, which are all the conditions that a healthy immune system, resilient, can balance. And that is how really well this might be defined by an immune system that knows what to do, when to do it, and doesn't overdo it. And so we start to recognize that maybe there's a quote, Western scientific explanation for what has been known for centuries and centuries in other cultures by the foods that they ate when they used nature's wisdom to their benefit. What happened in the Western world is we started taking all those ingredients out of our food when we process them to make high fat, sugar, salt foods that we could put flavorings and colorings in. We took those things out. And so we've been what would I want to say? We've been involved in a clinical study, uncontrolled, of eating a bunch of food to see what would effect they would have if we took all these substances out. And the results of that study is not too good. It's us. It's the rising tide of chronic illness. So that's what we've been learning recently about the immune system. And this whole tartary buckwheat story to me has been, for me, just kind of an aha opportunity to see the power of what nature can provide if we just get ourselves close to its messages.
You just said all of my favorite words. If we could all just recognize that nature has the wisdom to heal us all. It's incredible. And by the way, the tartary buckwheat flour is something that I use for my kids' pancakes every day, and they absolutely love it. So
Oh, fantastic.
people in your house, especially if you're gluten-free. There's so much to unpack.
From that. So, first of all, let's talk about the fact that your immune system, we think about it so much as just, sickness or not. But now we're hearing immune age. And if we can focus on our immune age. So, when we think about, you said immunosenescence, this could be then a stronger predictor of disease risk than chronological age.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really quite fascinating. We have seen over the last 10 years the development of what are called these age lock algorithms that have been developed with Steve Horvath at UCLA, professor there, and now it's expanded to mean. But these are ways of actually analyzing the genetic profile of different cells and seeing, based on these calculations, how biologically aged those cells are, not just their age and birthdays, but their age and function. And we can, from these studies, recognize that not all organs in our body age at the same rate. Some people, their brains may age faster than their livers. Other people, their hearts age faster than their muscles. So we can use this technology to start looking at what is aging at the cellular level mean in terms of the loss of function of those cells, or those tissues, or those organs. And in the immune system, because the immune system is in every...
Okay, so immune cells in every part of the body. You're going into the description of that.
Yes, and so the immune cells are then communicating at the inside functions of every cell in every tissue of every organ of our body. And that becomes a very, very a guiding principle then as to how the rest of the body is going to respond to that information. So if you want a point of attack to get control over your body, a good place to start is the immune system. And then we say, well, where is the immune system located? We know it's floating around in the blood cells, so-called white blood cells, but it turns out the immune system is clustered principally around our mucosal tissues, the first lines of defense to the outside world. So 70%, well, 60 to 70% of our immune system is clustered around our digestive tract.
Right.
So the first thing that happens when you eat is our immune system picks up that information and it translates it to the rest of the body. It tells the body, oh, this is a great meal. You're going to have a really great time, liver or heart or brain or muscles. Or it's going to say, oh, there's stuff in this meal that person just ate I'm not so sure about. It looks a little bit suspicious to me. We ought to call out the guards and we ought to be hyper vigilant. And what is hypervigilance in the immune system? That's called inflammation. So we have
Wow.
this inflammatory diet thing that's going on because we're eating foods for which the immune system doesn't see it as friendly. And it all occurs down there in our digestive tract. And what else is going on in our digestive tract? We have what's called the microbiome, hundreds of different critters that are also eating our food. This is the microbiome, the bacteria. And they are then producing their own messages as well to the immune system of our body, saying, that last meal, you're not going to like it, well, immune system, because it has things in that when I process it, I produce it into foreign chemicals that are going to make you upset. And so that becomes what we call dysbiosis, altered digestive health. That leads to leaky gut. Leaky gut means that the intestinal tract becomes permeable to leak things into the blood, which the blood shouldn't be seeing. And once that happens, then the immune system starts to get confused. So now we get into this whole thing of the dysbiosis, dysbiotic situation that so many people are not acutely ill, but they're chronically ill due to the burden of these messages that are really starting from food, digestive tract, microbiome, and immune system.
Let's call it all of those culprits, right? When you say immune system, I'm automatically thinking gut microbiome. So that I'm happy you brought that up for our listeners as well. And when I'm often, speaking to my clients around healing their digestion or how that relates to their gut microbiome, there's so many external assaults that some of them you've alluded to. So the biggest culprit I would say is food. We've got this horribly inflammatory diet, and even with food marketing, we're seeing foods labeled as being healthy when they're not at all. Then we've got this chronic stress. I love that you mentioned hypervigilance. This was me, and that's actually when my heart palpitations were at their worst. We've got poor sleep. We've got artificial lights. We've got environmental toxins. Um, we just came through an era of disinfecting everything, which I'm sure was detrimental to our gut microbiome. So when we think about this stress over time, and when you're speaking about immunosenescence, can we think about kind of reversing this process and this chronic inflammation that we're experiencing today and inflammaging, as you mentioned? Can you make the connection on one? It's the symptoms that are left untreated, right? I can imagine so many people, they're living with this inflammation that they're not aware of it, and that leads to low-grade disease over time. And then maybe we can get into some of the solutions after that. So how can one get this low-grade inflammation under control if they're not understanding root cause healing?
Yeah, thank you. I think you and I are good examples of this. We're symbolic of so many really good people. We're high achievers, right? We want to get the most out of our lives. We want to be good. We want to be productive. We want everything to fall in line. We want to think we can control our environment, knowing that the world is chaotic. And all of those, what are really attributes, I would call them virtues. Like all virtues can be turned into a negativity because now they put our immune system on overdrive. They create the interrelationship with our vagus nerve, which sits as this long meandering nerve from the cranial nerve all the way down to the end of our digestive tract. And, it's sending back messages to our brain, and our brain is sending messages to our digestive tract and to our microbiome and to our immune system in the gut. And so if we're these high vigilant people that are, I hate to use the word perfectionist because it conjures up maybe some negative
Yeah.
things, and that's what I want to convey. But we have very, very high achievement levels that we expect of ourselves. And we have multiple tasks and responsibilities, somewhat to the point of overload, where we just can't put another chess piece on the board or everything's going to fall off. That, I think, is another driver for our immune system to be in chaos. And when the immune system is speaking to every cell of every tissue of every organ, It speaks to things like the pacemaker cells in our heart, and our heart controls our heart rhythm and our heart rhythm. So you see a lot of people with AFib, atrial fibrillation. Where does that come from? I have many, many friends that are highly productive, super achiever people that in their 40s, maybe even in their 30s, actually, when I'm thinking back, we're ending up with cardiac irregularities. These are high fitness people, not probably too dissimilar to you, Mona, in your life. High achievers, high capable, they could get it done. Everything, give them a task, they could get it done. You always went to them first, no matter what, because they could always do it. And they ended up with cardiac irregularities, ended up with ablation or some type of a technology to get their heart to be under normal rhythm. Well, what was driving that? What was driving that is the interconnection of this whole installation through the immune nervous system and how it affected the electrical conduction to their heart and produced these rhythmic pulses of electricity that give rise to our heartbeat. And so these manifestations are symbols of imbalance. So we can be imbalanced in our diet. We can be imbalanced in our relationships. We can be imbalanced in our exercise, not enough, too much. We can be imbalanced our exposure to virtually anything without balance. People say you can smother yourself with love. Everything needs to be connected to a certain kind of balance point to allow for it to have resilience. And our immune system is kind of governor. It's there to kind of help us to have reserve when we need it and to attenuate when we are getting out of control. But it also has a point where it starts to move into chaos. And when it moves to chaos is we have all these chronic illnesses. We have dementia, cognitive dysfunction, depression, things of the nervous system. We used to think the brain was separated from the rest of the body. It's not. The brain has its own immune system called the microglia. And so all these things are interconnected. And so when you ask me, how does one get a control on this? It's getting back into rhythm. It's eating foods that look like they once grew in the ground. Foods that actually have the right kind of intentionality in their production, that they're designed for health and not just for profit. They're foods that we celebrate from because it's eating is more than just putting calories on our guts. It's an ability to connect to the planet in a very unique way with regenerative and sustainable agriculture. The plants have their immune system. The soil microbiome has its immune system. It's connected to our microbiome, which is connected to our immune system, which is connected to our eating pattern. All these things are part of the zeitgeist of living. And, that's, if I've learned anything from the tartary buckwheat story, I mean, now we own farms in upstate New York that are growing tartary buckwheat for the first time in the United States. It's been a really powerful example of me as a biochemist to really understand how this all connects together. When you look at how we as the species, as a human, have survived throughout millennia with a lot of pressure, a lot of challenges through infectious disease, and without a lot of serious medicine. And how we did that is learning how to be in compliance with nature in a much more effective way.
It's interesting. You're listing off these diseases, and whether it's cardiovascular disease, depression, type 2 diabetes, a lot of these things that can be prevented. And we think about stress really being the instigation of it all. And I wonder if doctors are probably trained in acute stress and acute dysfunction, but is there ever talk about following upstream and the symptoms that are caused from stress and how that leads to the breakdown in the gut and then the immune system?
Yeah, thank you. I think that is actually the question of our age. So there is a new book that was just published in 25 by a neurologist, Kevin Tracy is his name, called The Long Nerve.
Mhm.
It's about the vagus nerve. And I'll just summarize as the Cliff Notes version of the book. Um, the takeaway theme is that this nerve that we were discussing, the vagus nerve, the wandering nerve, vagus comes from the Greek wandering, um, that connects our brain to all these other organs of our body, is really, really patterned by the exposure that we have to things that are going on that ultimately influence our immune system. And this is really a very powerful scientific discovery of how the immune system and the nervous system are directly connected to the gut and to the gut microbiome. So, to illustrate that, I'll go back to my discussion of autoimmune disease for a second. So, in the field of rheumatology, they have what is called the International Classification of Rheumatic Diseases, ICAR. And they use that as a scale to determine if a therapeutic drug is effective in reducing or treating the conditions of that autoimmune disease. And they have what ICAR 20, ICAR 40, and ICAR 60. And what that means is that a drug can reduce 20% of the symptoms. That's ICAR 20. Or it can be an ICAR 40, that's 40% reduction, or 60 is 60%. The drugs that we're using for autoimmune disease, the so-called biologics, the things that the TNF alpha blocking drugs that cost more than $20,000 a year, those drugs block the signals of the immune system, so it does not create the inflammatory response at the tissues. That sounds really good. However, in so doing, it blocks our immune system so that it can't function as effectively because it's put a blanket over our immune system. And so what you start seeing are the side effects, which are the black box warning on these drugs, if you look at them, of increased lymphoma incidence with cancer, or increased risk of skin problems, or increased risk of a whole host of immune conditions like pneumonia. And so when you block the immune system to get rid of inflammation, you increase the risk of all the stuff the immune system is supposed to do good for you. So when you look at the drugs that we're using and ask how do they work on this ICR 20, 40, or 60 scale, in other words, rheumatologists who are prescribing these drugs, if you have 100 patients treated with these drugs, with the proper diagnosis and the proper drug at the proper level, what percentage of those people get positive outcomes at the ICR 60 level? I think most people will be surprised to know that the statistics say less than 60. Meaning something like nearly half the people that take these medications do not get clinical amelioration of their symptoms. And they have, unfortunately, the side effects of immune suppression. So it's like a double barrel problem.
Absolutely.
So people are now starting to say, and Kevin Tracy in this book started talking about it, that maybe what we ought to be thinking about in these pulmonological disorders, these autoimmune disorders, is lifestyle interventions so that if we're on a drug, we're going to maximize its benefit and minimize the amount we need. And so if you're going to use a drug, use it intelligently. Don't use it in a way that's probably likely not to be fully successful, that has serious adverse side effects. And you do that using the biology that we now have discovered, which history and society has known for millennia, about how to make your immune system better through eating the right foods, being with the right people, thinking the right thoughts, and doing the right things. So that's the lesson plan.
Yeah, last time I checked, there's no medication that knows exactly to go to one specific cell or area in your body without impacting everything else that's in there, right? And we don't think about that. And that goes for supplements as well. And it's fascinating too with what we're uncovering about epigenetics, right? Showing that our lifestyle interventions can really alter our digestion, our immune function, within weeks, and as you say, within 120 days of cellular turnover, and how that can improve our resilience. And yet, it fascinates me just from the nutrition lens that we are still so obsessed with finding the next red pill or diet or protocol when the research and the evidence is already there. If we really want to change these inflammatory patterns within us, as you said, it goes back to eating from nature, eating foods without ingredient labels, managing our stress, optimizing our sleep, focusing on purpose and love and gratitude and stuff like that. And it's fascinating hearing you, of all people, speak to this, because I think what is still missing from society, we still are looking for the white lab coat to say, well, go out, go spend some time on gratitude today, or go spend some time with a farmer. And I hope we're not too far from that. But I love the lens that you brought up. And with that comes the question then, epigenetics and our epigenome, is it the same research that you've done? Can we see changes within our immune system or gut microbiome so quickly?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really, really great question. And I think that this is, to me, the force multiplier of our age, is this new revolution in epigenetics, because I believe that the average person, even within the medical world, who has been exposed to a lot of training and education about physiology and anatomy, even those individuals still believe that our genes are sacrosanct and they give us everything that we are, and there's nothing we can do about it. We didn't fill out an application card. It was kind of the luck of the draw, and some people may have just got through the lottery, the good genes, and other people weren't so fortunate and got the bad genes. And that model is very limited and actually misdirected, because we now recognize that even if you study identical twins, their health trajectories are not the same most commonly.
Right.
They don't even live to be the same years of life. They often die at very different ages. I'm not talking about accidental deaths. I'm talking about natural causes of death. Um, and so how does that happen if we're all just our genes? And what I try to tell people, and this is my, I hope it's an understandable uh, metaphor.
Mhm.
So our genes are our book of life. They're the most important thing that we own. Uh, they are coded in 23 chapters. Half of each chapter was written by our biological mother, and the other half by our biological father. And each of those chapters, there are thousands of stories. The thousands of stories are our genes. And in that book of life resides information to direct every cell of every type in our body, every age. And it's the same information. It's the same book of life. Now, hold on. You're going to say, just a minute here. You're telling me that the book of life in my brain to make a brain cell is identical to the book of life in my skin, to that in my liver, to wherever? And the answer is yes. It's the same book of life. I mean, there may be the mutational changes of those are insignificant. It's the same book of life. Well, then why is it the brain, and the liver, and the skin? It's because the messages in our book of life got read differently by those cells when they were evolving from their embryonic states, the so-called primordial stem cell. When they started to become a differentiated cell, they developed a reading of only certain sections of your book of life. They read all the chapters on skin. They didn't read the chapters on brain. Well, hold it. Who controls what's read in the book of life? Aha. That's called your epigenome. There are marks that are put on your book of life as your cells are developing that will tell it what chapters are read here versus what chapters are cannot read.
Right.
Sticky notes and paper clips is what I call them. Those are epigenomes. Now, one might ask the question then, is there any relationship between we eat, what we think, who we interact with, toxins that we're exposed to, our gut microbiome, and the marks that are put on our genes that regulate how our book of life is read in different cells? That is the coin of the realm of this century. Previously, we said no. That only occurred in development, in fetal development or in infancy. It stopped after that. And whatever we were when we were born, and started to breathe oxygen, that's where we were going to be. That was our lot in life. Now we find out, lo and behold, that's not true, that there are these so-called metastable epithelial, with long-winded terminology, where the ability of certain cells in our body to continually sample and be epigenetically modified. So you can put things on and take them off. And you can go from the highway lane in your highway of life and those cells of degeneration, and you can take those messages off and you can put on messages that put you back on the lane of the highway of regeneration or rejuvenation. And the immune system does that beautifully. It's given the right opportunities. By the way you think, eat, love, participate, expose, all these things, you can rejuvenate your immune system. That is the power of what we've learned the last 15 to 20 years. So those individuals who are in the gloom and doom model need to wake up to the up and out transformative model of rejuvenation. It is possible, but we have to go against the dominant theme today, which tends to keep us in the lane of degeneration.
Right.
And in the lane of degeneration, if each is worse than the one before it. That's not the lane we want to stay in.
How fascinating. Like I was saying, that alone is worth celebrating. So many of us who are touched by disease, the awareness that if we simply rejuvenate our system, we take away these assaults or modifications to our DNA, then we're turning off genetic markers that are getting sick. And in a world where we're so focused on doing and strategizing and biohacking our way to longevity, the interventions that you've mentioned today to shift our immunosenescent cells, they're actually quite simple. So, for people who are listening, they're in. They really want to reverse this biological age. They want to give youth to their immune system for the future and what's to come, knowing that it's connected to everything else. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 drivers of immune strength that most people overlook, but maybe have the biggest return?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to get people to understand the power of the rainbow diet. I have a dear colleague that I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with now for over 25 years, Dr. Deanna Minnick, and she was a member of our research group for many years, and she worked very hard as part of this collaboration on developing diets that would rejuvenate health, rejuvenate the immune system. And one of the characteristics that we recognized that characterized the foods that were associated with these diets was that they were all colored foods, plants, fruits and vegetables, grains, and everything from red to blue and everything in between. Those colors in natural foods are the bioactive components that power up the rejuvenation of the immune system. So if we just said to ourselves that every day I'm going to eat the rainbow, I'm going to eat at least 3 or 4 different foods, portion sizes that have different colors, not synthetic colors, but natural from their origin. That generally takes us into the plant kingdom because that's where these compounds reside. So this is almost a little like omnivore's dilemma. We want to make sure we choose the right kind of foods that have these inherent properties for immunorejuvenation. That's one of the powers of that we found of Himalayan turtle buck with 126 different things that plant makes to actually regenerate our immune system's immune function. You don't need to eat a lot of it, but you need to have some of it. And you don't find it in white, salty, fat foods. So that's the thing. Get rid of alcohol, get rid of sugared beverages you don't have to completely get rid of alcohol, but certainly limit it. Get rid of white flour. Start introducing these colored foods naturally sourced. And it's amazing the effects that you will have on your immune resilience.
I love that, Deanna. I adore her. And I really do believe the future of healing is going to be about fiber, farmers and our fiber. If I could manifest that, I think the two go hand in hand. And what do you say about the impact of what's happening right now with pesticides and appeal and how that could impact our immune system?
Well, I'm kind of optimistic right now. I think we're in a state of flux, so I don't want to get too far over my skis. But our little farms up in upstate New York, which are farmed by extraordinarily skilled, dedicated farmers who have 30 years experience in organic farming, have taught me what regenerative agriculture is all about and what it means when you put your hand in the soil and how you can see the difference when you have rich soil. It's microbiome. The soil's microbiome is as robust as all these living critters that are positive for the plant's health, just as our robust, diverse microbiome in our gut is mostly for our body cells and the way we function as a total organism. So I think that we're seeing a rising tide of understanding that dead soil that's treated with chemicals is not the solution to either our ecology or our human health issues. They're all interrelated. And I'm pretty emboldened. We're a member now of this group of companies called the Purpose Pledge Group that is going back to revisit what are the principles that we need to be all connected to with regard to the future of food production and food technology and ultimately food processing and into food people. What are the things that will lead to the sustainability, not only of our health, but planetary health? And once you start thinking that way, and you start to recognize these are not unachievable objectives. These are not pie in the sky kind of fairy book stories. They can actually be implemented and they will actually be economically viable. It's just breaking old habits. We went to this concept of monoculture where we have these specialized genetically hybridized seeds that only take certain types of pesticides and herbicides and chemicals to produce a large yield. They produce a large yield of nutrient deprived foods, which then starves people and makes them candidates for the pharmaceutical world to treat their health conditions. We need to break that cycle, which we can. It's breakable. Going back to the things that we know are right. Are the principles that they're not have to be made up. We already have studied them and we already have them in the textbooks. We just have to apply them.
I agree with you. Let's amplify the resilience of our bodies and of our soil and our connection to nature as a source of healing. I'm going to borrow your optimism to make that happen. And I'm on a mission to help make farming really cool so that my kids in the future have a big part of it, so that we can see kind of the future of food. Just stick around. And I want to thank you for all the work that you've done and just bringing this to the forefront. And thank you for your time. Gosh, today I think we covered so much more than I anticipated, but shedding light on everything from nutrient deficiencies and toxin exposure and our stress responses all are interacting within us, um, and the interconnectedness between that and disease. Thank you for being such a thought leader in this industry. I always say that you're my person that I go to for source for the truth on healing that everyone needs to hear. So thank you so much for today.
I'm very touched by that. Thank you. That's the most flattering comment that I could receive. So I really appreciate it. And I wish you absolute strength and power in your advocacy. What you're doing is so important to spread this news. So we just need to get people to understand there are alternatives that they can elect in their lives that will really increase the value and reduce burden of dysfunction they don't really need to live with.
I'm with you, and I'll keep following you and chasing you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bland.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.
Bye-bye.